Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first story is titled, My Parents and Dan Came Back Sooner Than I Thought and They Wanted Money This Time. This won't surprise some people who commented on my previous posts, as my parents did some of the exact things they said they would, such as wanting either my money or my signature. I did expect the classic lines of narcissists saying that I owed them, or giving me some kind of socialist BS about sharing the wealth, but that was just my imagination running wild. The ensuing situation was somewhat similar to that, but much tamer, I guess you could say. They seemed to know not to push me too far now, and were mostly aiming for pity. It began when my parents recently got in touch with me through social media, and asked for a meeting in a public place of my choosing. It just screamed trap, but I wasn't afraid. In fact, I was amused. They know I'm not to be messed with anymore, so I could only wonder what they wanted this time. I picked a local restaurant that may have a name with an olive and a garden in it, and we met up there. Dan was with them, but he kept his mouth shut most of the time. We had awkward greetings, ordered some drinks, and then cut to the chase. My parents begged me to help Dan get his own apartment so he could finally move out. Apparently, Dan's credit isn't so great. Gee, I wonder why. Could it be that his wife regularly spends him into a hole? Well, they asked that I help by either supplying some capital or co-signing for the apartment and helping to pay the rent for it. I simply said no to both. That's when Dan spoke up in anger and yelled at me that I have so much and I don't have a family to support like he does. He needed my help and I should be sparing the money for his family since I don't have one myself. I laughed and asked where they were when I needed their help. Oh, that's right. They were pointing and laughing at me for being homeless. Or should we go further back to my childhood? I'd love to delve into that with plenty of ears to listen in around us. My mother grabbed my hand and begged me not to speak of any of it. My father and Dan both just looked away and said nothing. I'm pretty sure they wanted to say something like they used to say to me, but held their tongues. I asked them if they thought I was rich or something, and their looks said it all. And when I told them I don't have that kind of money, they looked at me like deer in headlights. I broke it down about how much I'd managed to save for the down payment on my house and the way I had to live and work to save that much so fast. And then how I spent nearly all of it on the down payment of my house. I'm still in financial recovery. I did have monthly income to spare, yes, but most of it was going right into my savings. I asked Dan what his yearly salary was, and when he told me, I pointed out that it was actually a bit higher than mine. I then loosely broke things down in rough math in front of my parents about how about 70% of my income goes to my mortgage, insurance, gasoline, internet, phone, food, and other bills. And then there's maybe 30% of that left at most that I can put into savings. And I need that money saved to get back on my feet in time. And I have to make sure I have savings to fall back on. My truck is from the 90s. If it were to break down, I'd need money to either fix or replace it. And there are other things one would need a rainy day fund for, like home repairs, doctors, taxes, lawyers, or anything in general you'd need quick cash for when it's a sudden unexpected expense. So as you can see, I just can't spare money for Dan. And I also refuse to co-sign for anything as that would leave me on the hook for any bill Dan couldn't or wouldn't pay. Then I pointed out that's likely why my parents didn't co-sign for Dan's apartment themselves long ago, and my mother just started crying again. I was pretty much one step ahead of them in all of this. I'm not an ATM, and I'm not a fool, and I stated that right to their faces. I expected my father to become angry with me like he always does, but this time he just, well, didn't. I've known this man to explode on me for the slightest provocation of not enabling my brother all of my life, but this time he just didn't do that. There wasn't even a sneer on his face. The only way I could describe the look he had was regret and defeat. Maybe regret for being a crappy parent, or maybe regret because he can't bully me around anymore. Who knows? Either way, my parents couldn't really argue with me, and I wasn't about to give them any money. Dan just got up and said this was all just a waste of their time and that he was leaving. My mother just excused his behavior, and we all parted ways. That was about it. Not nearly as much drama as I thought there'd be, but this is still far better than how things used to be with my parents and brother. As for sister-in-law, well, she's been regularly complaining online about my parents. She really doesn't seem to like the fact that she's not the queen bee of their house, and I think her toxicity is finally getting to them. Why else would they be so desperate to come crawling back to me? Sister-in-law actually wants my parents to move into a camper like I had to do to make space in the house, and she's being told no every time. She does seem to have a following of Karen-minded people like her, though, because here and there I get messaged by someone I don't know. that are intent on raging at me for not giving up my house for sister-in-law. I don't bother to argue with these people anymore. I just block and move on. Though there was one persistent troll who had my phone number and they call from a different number every time. Yes, it seems to be the same person who called me to say I need to make way for a real family man like Dan, but I couldn't care less. The calls, though, seem to have slowed down, if not maybe stopped, because I made it clear to that person that they were only amusing me by keeping this up so long. The last time they called was around the beginning of the month, and it's been silence from them since then. The next story is titled HOA Trespassed and Broke into My Home with Bolt Cutters and Destroyed My Tree. I sued them for $285,000. Living in an HOA neighborhood was never something I thought I would have to deal with. My grandparents had lived in one before, and their horror stories about the endless rules and ridiculous fines made my parents swear off ever living in one again. However, after my grandparents passed away, I inherited their house and decided to move in. I didn't want to sell it to a stranger who wouldn't appreciate it as much as my grandparents had, so I figured I would live in it until I could rent it out to another family member or someone who was close to me. Little did I know, my decision would lead to one of the most stressful and infuriating experiences of my life. The first few days in the house were relatively peaceful until I received a knock on the door. It was the HOA board members, and right off the bat, they were rude and nosy. They demanded that I sign their papers, but after looking through their ridiculous rules, I refused to do so. I thought I was in the clear until I received fines in the mail. They were demanding that I pay these fines, even though I never signed their papers. I refused to pay. And that's when things took a turn for the worse. One day I came home from work to find the HOA board members in my yard, along with professional landscapers. They had broken into my yard with bolt cutters and were in the process of taking down a tree that my grandmother had planted with my grandfather over 50 years ago. I was absolutely livid. They had no right to be on my property, let alone destroy something that held so much sentimental value. I immediately called the police and contacted a lawyer. The HOA board members tried to fight the charges, but it was clear that they had broken the law. I ended up suing them for emotional distress and was awarded $285,000 in damages. It was a small victory, but it felt good to stand up for myself and my grandparents. However, my battle with the HOA was far from over. The more I researched the organization, the more I realized how corrupt it truly was. It wasn't just about the fines and the ridiculous rules. It was about the board members abusing their power and using the organization as a means to make money. I decided to take matters into my own hands and started attending HOA meetings. I wanted to see firsthand what was going on and to make my voice heard. I quickly realized that the board members were a tight-knit group who didn't take kindly to outsiders. They made it clear that they didn't want me there, but I refused to back down. Over time, I started to gain support from other members who were fed up with the HOA's corrupt ways. We formed a coalition and started to dig deeper into the organization's finances. What we found was shocking. The board members had been embezzling money for years, using the HOA's funds to pay for their own personal expenses. We presented our findings to the authorities, and the board members were arrested and charged with fraud. Justice had been served, and the HOA was disbanded. It was a bittersweet victory, but I was proud to have played a part in bringing down an organization that had caused so much stress and frustration for so many people. In the end, I decided to keep my grandparents' house and make it my own. It was a constant reminder of the battle I had fought and the victory I had won. I turned it into a sanctuary, a place where I could escape the stresses of the outside world. And as for the HOA, it was nothing more than a distant memory. A cautionary tale of power gone wrong and the importance of standing up for what you believe in. But my story doesn't end there. A few months after the HOA was disbanded, I received a call from a man named Jack. He introduced himself as a former member of the HOA board and said he had something important to tell me. We met up at a local coffee shop, and Jack told me that he had been working with the FBI to bring down the corrupt members of the HOA board. He said that my involvement in the coalition had caught their attention, and they wanted to thank me for my help. Jack gave me a folder filled with documents that outlined the FBI's investigation. They had been watching the HOA for years, trying to gather enough evidence to take down the corrupt board members. Jack said that my involvement had been the final piece of the puzzle. I was stunned. I had no idea that my actions had played such a significant role in the FBI's investigation. Jack thanked me for my help and said that he had one more thing to show me. He pulled out a piece of paper and handed it to me. It was a letter from the FBI director, thanking me for my help in taking down the corrupt members of the HOA board. The letter also said that I was being awarded a Medal of Honor for my bravery and dedication to justice. I couldn't believe it. I had never considered myself a hero, but to be recognized by the FBI was an incredible honor. I thanked Jack and the FBI for their work, and I left the coffee shop feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment. Today, I still live in my grandparents' house, and it's become a symbol of the battle I fought and the victory I won. I'm grateful for the experience because it taught me the importance of standing up for what I believe in and the power of collective action. The HOA may have caused me a lot of stress and frustration, but it also gave me a sense of purpose and a platform to make a difference. The next story is entitled Parker, Parked in My Driveway, so I blocked them in and got drunk all weekend. On Friday night after work, I returned home only to find that someone in our neighborhood was having a big party, and somebody decided to park in my driveway, thinking they were entitled to do so. My driveway is a single car width, lined on both sides with a retaining wall, and with a garage at the end. It is impossible for a tow truck to pull the car out without causing damage. Since there was a lack of street parking, I decided to park my car right behind theirs in my driveway. A few hours went by, and then the entitled Parker came to my door, demanding that I move my car so that they could leave. I informed them that I had been drinking and would not move my car. They persisted, and so I simply reiterated my position. The entitled Parker then decided to call the police to force me to move. When the police arrived, I made sure to grab a beer from the fridge before I answered the door to talk to the officer. I informed the officer that I had been drinking, was in no shape to drive, and would not move my car. The police were stuck. They couldn't tow the entitled Parker's car out, I was in no condition to drive, and I was legally parked in my driveway. In the end, I told the entitled Parker that I would be on a weekend-long bender, and that they could come and move my car after I went to work on Tuesday. The next story is titled, Babysitting Means Paying the Kids' Dental Bills. Years ago, I used to babysit my neighbor's 9-10-year-old daughter. He was a divorced father with the kind of ex that would send spreadsheets of child-rearing expenses calculated to the penny and weekly invoices complete with terms and penalties of her own choosing for late payments. He paid big child support and generally paid her invoices on time because she would cut off access to the kiddo if he didn't. His ex, the snake, and I had basic text messaging contact. She and I had a previous dust-up because a sudden weather change necessitated a jacket for the kiddo. We popped into the nearest discount store and I let her pick a jacket. Kiddo loved it, but her mother threw a giant fit at me because it wasn't brand name. I blew it off and the neighbor and I laughed about it when he reimbursed me. She gave me the silent treatment. Time moved forward. Father always reimbursed kiddo's expenses and encouraged fun and healthy activities. One day he called me and apologized that he was getting held up at work, and kiddo had an orthodontist appointment. He asked me to take her. I agreed, and he called the dentist to authorize. We got there, and they wouldn't see her without a payment of $225. It was necessary. Kiddo's braces were hurting her. Dad wasn't available, but I knew he would reimburse me, so I put it on my credit card rather than call her snake of a mother. Kiddo got patched up, Dad reimbursed me, I paid the card and didn't use it. A few months later, I got a past due call from my card company. Repeat charges from the orthodontist. I let Dad know and called the orthodontist, who told me I signed an automatic payment agreement. I gave my heck no I'm just the babysitter speech and didn't get far with them, so I canceled the card. Dad apologized profusely and reimbursed me. A month later, I got a nasty call from the orthodontist about my card declining. I kindly informed them I'm not the parent and provided the snake's phone number. About an hour later, the snake was furiously calling and texting me. I silenced my phone and looked later. She maxed out my voicemail and all of her text messages were about how I was abusing her child by denying the kid medical care. One voicemail was from the police letting me know she filed a complaint, how I could get a copy from my attorney, and inquiring about whether I wanted to file a countercomplaint. I sure did. I moved out of state and the prosecutor called me once just to ask questions. Then I never heard back from the prosecutor. The last I heard from the kiddo's grandmother was that the snake took a plea bargain, Dad got custody, and Grandma was enjoying a lot more time with the kiddo. The next story is titled, Parents Prefer Incest Over Me Being Happy. I've, 21 male, been in a surprisingly successful relationship for the past year and a half ever since I moved to Europe to start my studies. Honestly, I didn't think I'd hold it together this long, but hey, the girl actually likes me. Shocker, she's honestly perfect. Spiritually, she is a neckbeard, and I love her for it. My parents, not so much. Not because of her personality, they don't care about little things like that. She's European, and that's the problem. My parents belong to a minority in the Middle East. We believe in a lot of things, but the kicker is that if you marry outside your faith, you get excommunicated. Disowned, not allowed back in the village, the whole shebang. And since there are so few of us, privileges are handed out so that finding the love of your life would still be possible. The dude down the street assault a child? It's fine. We'll just introduce my daughter to him. I'm sure he's a good man. Son fell in love with your niece? It's fine. Matters of the heart are complicated. Your daughter fell in love with an Englishman after 8 years of living in England? Burn her at the stake. I feel like my mom genuinely thought that I was going to move back home to the village and meet someone there like she and her siblings did, but surprise, surprise, I wasn't a fan of it. Especially since her siblings consist of her sister, who married a man 20 years younger than her, her brother, who married his cousin, and her other brother, who's on his third marriage with a woman who can only be described as a vanilla-flavored biscuit. Ever since I got into a relationship, my parents have been relatively supportive. I feel like my mom was just glad I'm not gay, since I wasn't like the other boys in high school, and my dad, in true dad fashion, was just happy I was getting some. 1.5 years later, they started showing their concern. My dad regularly sits me down for talks about our heritage, and my mom regularly jokes about setting me up with my future bride. Whenever I bring up something remotely serious about my girlfriend, they get visibly upset. I'm in a position right now where I possibly have to move cities. The fact that I want to stay where I am because I'm not exactly enthusiastic about leaving my girlfriend and the life I've built here caused them to short-circuit. All of a sudden, my poor academic performance wasn't due to my many mental health problems or COVID, or just my lack of interest in the subject. It was the witch who seduced me and led me astray. Because their golden boy is definitely incapable of making poor decisions himself. So yeah, it got to a point where they're trying their hardest to force me to move cities just to get away from my girlfriend. They're arguing about it every phone call now, and if I just give it time, they're going to add the financial pressure on top of that. That's fun. I just really hope they mellow out soon. If not for me, for my siblings' sakes. I'm the oldest, so I get the brunt of the generational friction, but I only hope it gets better when they get older. The last story is titled Narcissistic Parents Wanted Me to Trade Houses with Them because I got a slightly better one, and then literally stole my air conditioners when I refused to give them money. I'm going to start this off by saying that if you have a house and don't have cameras, get cameras. I have some now, but I should have gotten them sooner. I live in a pretty typical manufactured home in Arizona. My parents also live in one just a few streets over. Despite how close we are, I'm VLC because they are just bad people. They treated me okay as a kid, but things changed as soon as I was in my late teens. I was expected to do more and pay my way as soon as I finished high school. That was fair. I was an adult by then, after all. But my parents wanted a lot more in rent than what I'd have to pay to get my apartment. I'd have had next to nothing left of my monthly paycheck if I'd given them what they wanted. So I refused to give them more than a fair amount, plus a share in utilities. And I started buying my own food as well. My father openly said this was not good enough, and my parents actually filed official paperwork to evict me when I refused to cater to their demands. I left home and got an apartment with my best friend. 5 years later, and I bought my own house in a neighborhood not far from my parents'. It's just an old, manufactured home on a small property, but it was so damn cheap that I couldn't turn it down. And my monthly mortgage isn't bad either. I even moved my best friend in to help me cover the bills. We were already used to living in the same space, and the house gave us much more room. I may even let another friend move in to get some more rent money for the mortgage because we've got one room that's actually left unused right now since the house is a 3-bedroom. My parents, though, somehow didn't like my independence from them. Did they want me to fail or something? I don't know. But the incident that caused the VLC was when they demanded I trade houses with them. Yes, you read that correctly. They actually wanted to trade. Their manufactured home is smaller and older than mine and has one less bedroom. And their yard is smaller too. Not that either of us has any grass. It is Arizona after all. When they first saw my place, they looked pissed. After a couple more visits, my father actually said it wasn't fair that I was doing better than them, and I was rubbing my nicer house in their faces. It's just an old manufactured home in one of the hottest states in the U.S. Seriously, what's to brag about? But I guess having something even slightly better than what my parents had irked them. And as I've already said, they actually demanded we trade houses because of it. My friend who lives with me literally fell onto the couch laughing when they said that, and I couldn't help but join in. My father said it was not funny, and to give him what he wants. When I recovered my composure, I said he and my mother were not entitled to my house or anything I own, for that matter, and then told them to get the duck out. After that, we barely spoke. And then the pandemic hit. It didn't really change my life much. I like the peace and quiet, and my friend knows to leave me alone most of the time. My father, however, got laid off, and he struggled to find another job. He ended up working in the local MARTA walls for half a year before getting a better paying job. I did get a kick out of seeing him there when I was shopping for groceries. But as much as I hate him, I'm not going to call him a bad employee. He actually did fine. But during that time, he and my mother kept calling me and asking for money. And I know what y'all are thinking. Don't lend them anything. They didn't want loans. They wanted handouts. Why? Because they raised me, and I owed them. I said if they didn't want the cost of raising a kid, they shouldn't have had one. A few weeks ago, though, my mother called me begging for money because their dinosaur of a window AC unit finally crapped out. I told them I was not giving them anything, and they were too cheap to replace that old AC unit for a long time. So I wasn't going to buy them a new one. My mother then complained about how I have two in my house, and the least I could do is give them one. I then said that maybe if she and my father weren't always pissing away their money on beer and MJ all the time, they'd have the money to buy another AC. Then I said I wasn't giving them one of mine or any money. End of story. Only it wasn't the end of the story. A few days later, I came home from work to find my house had been broken into. My front door locks were drilled out, and both of my window AC units were gone. Nothing else was stolen, but they went out of their way to make a huge mess for some stupid reason, probably to make it look like a typical robbery or something. I knew it had to have been my parents and called the police. I told police that I heavily suspected my parents of the theft because they act entitled to my stuff, even though I'm a grown man that doesn't live with them. I went with police to my parents' house, and sure enough, they had both my AC units going in their windows. When confronted, my parents obviously denied the theft, then claimed they already owned the AC units. But statements from their neighbors said otherwise, but my parents still denied the theft. I'd bought both AC units used online years ago, which means I had no receipts for them. So I figured my only option was to look for witnesses in my own neighborhood. And as luck would have it, a neighbor across the street has security cameras, and the edge of one of them caught just enough to see my parents showing up in my father's truck. My father could be seen walking with a cordless power drill in hand, and a few minutes later they came back to the truck with my AC units. Then went back in to ransack the place, I'm guessing. With this evidence in hand, police had cause to arrest my parents. At first, both of them acted like they'd done nothing wrong, but I convinced the police to let me do the talking. I said they could either return the AC units to my home and clean up the mess they made, or I'd let the police arrest them both right there. They'd already stolen from me, lied to police, trespassed, vandalized my house, broke my front door locks, and there was video evidence of what they'd done. If I pressed charges, they were both going to jail for sure. My parents looked deflated, then asked for a moment to talk with each other in their bedroom. I heard a lot of shouting from both of them, and I could hear my mother yelling that my father was an idiot, and he was trying to blame me in turn. After about 5 minutes of that, they came back out looking even more deflated and said they'll return the AC units and stop bothering me for money if I didn't press charges. I said they were going to clean up the mess in my house and buy new locks for my front door as well. And then I wanted written apologies from both of them on top of it. They begrudgingly agreed and even got a police escort back to my house. My father was forced to put the AC units back in my windows, and then left my mother to clean up the huge mess they made while he went out and bought replacement locks for my front door. He was gone about an hour and came back with a new stainless steel lock set to replace the knob and deadbolt. Then he had to help my mother finish cleaning. During this time, I let the two cops just sit and watch them while drinking soda. They said it was very entertaining. After everything was cleaned up, I gave my parents each a piece of paper and a pencil, then told them to write out apologies to me for what they'd done. My father looked especially pissed and said I was treating him like a child. I said he was acting like one and never stopped treating me as a child either. This was just me holding him accountable, and I could have sent him to jail, but I felt like this was better for teaching him a lesson. He then kind of snorted and started writing. My mother wrote out a good apology, but my father was pretty half-assed and passive-aggressive. But I didn't care. It seemed to kill him a little inside to have to do it. And when he was done, he left without speaking to me. My mother said she was sorry and she'd leave me alone, then followed after him. The two cops said they thought the whole thing was hilarious and then thanked me for giving them an excuse to take a break while on the job before leaving. Not long after, I shelled out to get some cameras for the exterior of my house. So if someone tries to break in again, I'll get it on video. I only have 2 cameras, but added a couple more fake ones that look real enough just to scare people off. I haven't heard a peep from my parents, but their next-door neighbor told me they went and bought a new AC unit. Guess they had the money for one after all. Makes me wonder how high they were when they thought it was a good idea to steal from me. Maybe having lean pockets for a while will teach them. Then again, they are who they are after all. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.